Oh, recording in progress indeed. Right, welcome everyone. I just want to do some chronological calculations, which go as follows. So this week we have a share, which should have been self-evident given that we're here. Next week we have a share, please God. And then we've got a massive break. Why? Because Wednesday isn't kind to Zoom sharing for the next, if you calculate it. We've got Rosh Hashanah on a Wednesday night. We've got Yom Kippur, I think, is Wednesday night. Is that true? I think it is Wednesday night, Thursday.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we've got Sukkot, and then we've got
Oh,
probably Simchas Torah, maybe.
yeah.
Yeah. So we're basically next week is going to be the last share, probably for about 5 weeks or so. There we are. Don't miss us too much. We'll
Oh,
be back. We'll be back with a bang. And please God, after the Chagim is October. But nevertheless, that's the calculation. It could have been worse. I thought I had booked myself. Hampstead Garden Suburb need me for something next week, but I've managed to have that be at 7:40 or something, so we can still have the share. Please God, next week, which is good. Okay, right now let's share the screen. Not always a simple task. Let's see if we can share it. Here we are. 1 second. Here we are. Okay, can people see my screen? Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, silence is going to be yes tonight, I can see. Okay, what are we doing? So we were finishing off, to be honest, this topic of miracles, and then I said we would start the topic of the Jewish people. Yeah, we good with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's one other element that we probably didn't cover last week. We finished a little bit earlier. I just wanted to show this inside, this Rav Dessler. It's a beautiful idea over here. He says like this: there's this notion, these two Hebrew terms called Hashgacha klalis and Hashgacha pratis. So let's unpack them. Hashgacha, Hebrew term, means
Is it divine?
well, ish. You know what would they say? You're not wrong, but you're not right. Um, Yeah, so hashgacha in modern Hebrew, actually, a mashgiach, right? Like a kashrus mashgiach is someone who checks over the food, right? So
Mm.
hashgacha can mean to check, or it could mean to supervise, or it could mean to control, right?
No.
So when I say hashgacha pratis means personalized supervision. That is a general term for Hashem control, I guess, controlling, supervising what happens to us. Right? So that's whatever you're davening for something, it happens. Hashgacha protest, individualized, personalized, right? You're running, or whatever, and the bus comes just on time. On the rare occasion, it does. Yeah, that is hashgacha protest, right? You've got something called hashgacha klalis, which is general intervention by Hashem. In other words, it's not personalized, but you're the recipient of it because you're part of something general. A nice introduction of the Jewish people, which we'll see soon. Because there's some things that we are promised as individuals, but there are many things we're promised not as individuals, but as people. Right? In other words, the promise to the Jewish people that we will survive is not an individual promise, right? No one survives forever, but it is a promise to the Jewish people. The Jewish people as a nation will survive. Anyway, so I want to read this from Dessler. It's very nice. He says, Yadua haklal shehetzif harambam zal. It's very well known, this rule the Rambam sets, Shakadosh Baruch Hu eino mashkiach al ishei ba'alei chayim. Hashem isn't interested in animals in general, ela al minehem, right? In other words, not individual animals, but he wants their species to stick around. Yeah, this we did elements of this last week, but I want to read it. Aval ta'asu lachshov, but we shouldn't think shelachesram chashivas shar balei chayim ein hakadosh baruch hu medanyan behem. It's not because they don't have any importance, right? The eino yedeh paratem kaviyachal, and Hashem doesn't know what's happening in the animal kingdom because they're not important whatsoever. That's not the point. Ze eino, that's not so. That's not so. I'm going to try and highlight that. Ki kiyum kol hanimtzaim tluyim b'ritzon Hashem u'machshavto. Rather, existence of everything is in as much as Hashem, as much as it's connected to Hashem. As it says, Va'ata machaya es kulam. Hashem gives life to everything, right? So in which case, what does it mean? So he says as follows. He says, "Avala inyan hu." Here's the matter. Here's what it means. The difference between hashgacha klalis, which is the world in general, and hashgacha pratis, which is for us individual people. He says, "Hashgacha perushan hagalafi tachlis." The word hashgacha means pushing something towards fulfilling its purpose. Ki abriya nivreis alidei bara echad baruch hu. The world is created by one God, but a tachlis echad for one purpose. כל השייך לבחינה מיוחדת בחלקי התכלס, שייכס בו השגחה מיוחדת לפי בחינס התכלס שלו. Right? So it's a little bit like, there were those, do you remember the Williams sisters, tennis, right? So if I'm not mistaken, I don't know my sports history fantastically well, but their father from a young age basically had a tennis farm or created a tennis farm and decided that like they would play hours and hours of tennis each day. Yeah. As he felt that their purpose in life, if we can say that, is to play tennis. And therefore he was manhig them, meaning he directed them, he drove their entire lives towards being tennis players. Yeah. I mean, it's a good job they succeeded. Otherwise, like what an epic failure of many, many hours and lots of effort, right? So Hashgacha in this context, says Rav Dessler, means Hashem driving us towards fulfilling a purpose, right? That's what Hashgacha means. It's not that Hashem doesn't know what's happening in the animal kingdom, but they have a different purpose. And he says it like this: in a kol min b'china miyuchedet lo b'yosakli beis ofen letachlis. Every single species in the world, yeah, it is a means to a purpose. I'll explain that in a second. Masha'en came parte kol min v'min, but the individuals within that species, in prat zekayim or lo. In other words, I don't know, take a species of animal. Dogs in general have a purpose, right? But that purpose isn't going to be interfered with or isn't going to be destroyed or ruined if that particular dog isn't around anymore. Right? Now, the species have a purpose, but that particular dog or that particular one of them, right, that doesn't have, if you take that out, that dog away, that doesn't ruin the purpose of the species. The species have a purpose, but the individuals don't, right? He says, there's their perish. This is what it
So
means.
does that mean that, like, when the dodos are no more, we have to say that Hashem feels that at that point in history, the dodos didn't have any more purpose?
Yes, something like that. Yeah, 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 yeah. So that it's an interesting one. They asked the classic question, where were the dinosaurs? Like, if the world is X number of years old, why is the dinosaurs are dated way beyond that? Yeah. So there's a sub question that no one asks, which is what you're asking, Gideon. Why did Hashem see fit to create a species at some point in history and then have them become extinct? Like, what's the point of
Hmm.
that? As much as that species had a purpose in the world, what happened to it? Fair
Yeah,
point?
yeah.
Is it an answer?
Pardon?
Has someone got an answer?
Yeah, you have to come to the next. Yeah, you have to come to the black belt class. This is this is that class is at 2 a.m. That's already the real It's not an answer.
Then
Yeah.
I'll be there.
Pardon?
If I'm going to get an answer, then I'll be there.
All right, it's good because Gideon hosts it. You just knock until you get an answer. He opens up. He doesn't. If you knock too quietly, he doesn't think you're serious enough.
Yeah, you're very funny.
um, what's it called? Yeah, there is a notion of changing purposes per pi. No, I'm joking. Changing purposes. That there is a notion of that, not for mankind because our purpose is pretty set and it's quite directly connected to God. But given that the animal kingdom is subservient to the general purpose of the world, you can have species that go in and out of fashion, so to speak. You can have that. For example, a car has the same purpose, basically, right? No matter how fancy it is, right? Let's assume it's not a fashion symbol for a second. Yeah, it does have the same purpose. Just over the years, the different elements of cars, some are needed and some are not. I mean, like my car, God bless it, and all who sail in her, right? The back windows still have that handle thing. Yeah. It's like a remarkable feature. You know, they're literally winding down the windows is still a thing in my car.
Yeah, but we don't have a crank at the front to wind it up anymore because they used to wind up to start the engine, didn't
I think Rabbi finds one does. And if that doesn't work, then he gets out and pushes.
It doesn't. I've just no. I've just changed the stone wheels for the ones with rubber. They work much better. It's remarkable.
they?
Um, although the stone ones never got a puncture, I have to say. They were great. Um, yeah. Wilma helped me change them. Um, anyway, what's it called? Yeah, meaning the parts of the car has the same purpose, but the parts change. Right? The parts do change. There's certain, I'm not
Yeah,
a mechanic or a car expert, but as you said, there's certain parts that change over the years, and that's fine, right? Generally
But
speaking,
I think the
go on.
dinosaur question, well, the dodo question is interesting in that people were around at the same time as the dodo were, um, and therefore maybe you can say what I was suggesting, that whatever purpose the dodos had was achieved,
Mhm.
and therefore Hashem was happy for them to go extinct. But the
Right.
dinosaurs is interesting because that was before there was humanity, and therefore it is, I think, a harder question because whatever their purpose was, it certainly wasn't, you know, progressing anything to do with man because there was no man.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. There isn't a sieve that talks about the fact, yeah, you're right, you've extended the question as if central facet of the world is mankind, you'd expect that the purpose of other things somehow dovetail right with that, or dodo tail
Exactly. Yeah.
in our
Yeah.
question, in our case. Yeah, you'd expect that. There is an Netziv, in a comment of the Netziv, he's talking about the flood. It's a remarkable comment because he lived in the, I think, early 1900s. I'm not sure when they discovered dinosaurs, or at least pieced them together, but he seems to be writing in the 1900s saying that we have recently discovered, big bones. There's dinosaurs, these big animals that seem to live in climates that were not ours. You know what I mean? And he talks about in the context of the flood, what happened to those bones, which is interesting. Another question, right? Surely those bones should have gone, right? Or, why are they still here if it's talking about pre-flood? And then he talks about
Can I ask?
yeah, sure, Jeremy. Hello.
Sorry. Hi. Because you mentioned dovetails and the flood, I don't know if I'm overthinking it, but there was a specific dove that had a purpose at the end of the flood.
Hmm.
So is it that it could have been any random dove? For example, I'm using the dove as an example. I'm sure there's others in the Torah, like other examples of any particular animal doing a particular thing. But so is the idea that it could have just been any one of that species that was plucked out of somewhere? It wasn't that specific dove that had a role or a
Yes,
purpose.
presumably so. Yeah, presumably. In other words, there wasn't, unless Gideon's probably going to bring me some medrash that this dove was special and whatever. But
Well,
yeah,
I'm going to move away from doves to
Okay.
talking donkeys because that was very specific, wasn't it?
yeah, you mean to talking donkeys? Um,
Yeah.
yes, that was yes. You're saying it could be the specific animal, let's say an animal that's been used in the past for other things. In theory, you could have that, although generally speaking, you don't have that. By the way, all these
No,
questions, it's gone.
I'm saying that Bilam had that, that donkey, the talking donkey for Bilam or whatever. That was like that's got to be specific. Couldn't have been any donkey. Or are we saying it could have, and Hashem made any?
Yeah, there's
I seem to
nothing.
remember there was something created, like Hashem created it at the beginning
That's
for that
true, but
purpose.
that could have also been any donkey. Meaning, okay, it had to be one, but I'm not sure that donkey won the raffle. You know what I mean?
Right, right. Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know. But these questions are all great. I'm not being funny. The more you imagine and get close to a topic, yeah, the more questions should arise from that. Amazing. I don't know if I've ever shared this with you. It's remarkable. You can learn something again, again, and again, and then someone asks a question, and at first glance, you're like, "What an obvious question! I must have the answer to that." And then you realize that's not an obvious answer whatsoever. Yeah. So I'll just tell you something in this vein. One of my students in Hasmo once asked, he said like this, he said, if there was a flood which affected the entire world, the debate whether it affected Israel or not, but okay, affected the entire world, how can you have animals in Australia? Do you hear that question? Meaning, at some point, the animals got off the ark. Yeah. Pick a
Yeah.
country you got off at. Name any country you want. I don't mind. How did they get? Why the animals in Australia?
Why Australia specifically?
Yeah, because it's covered by water, surrounded by water. So if
Yeah,
they
I
got
mean,
off anywhere,
you can pick
or
any
if
country.
they got off in Australia, then how did the animals get anywhere else?
Yeah, yeah,
Is the
exactly. In other
whole
words, they
question.
got off at one place. It's not that there was a bus stop, the world tour, kind of the Ark, Noah's World Tour. Sounds like a punk group in the 1970s. Noah's World Tour, right? And they stopped off at various countries. Right, which elephants would like to be in Africa? And which elephants would like to be in, I don't know, in Asia, etc. I'm not going to Northern Hemisphere or Southern Hemisphere again, Gideon. Yeah. But, which presumably they were one country, they stopped and they all got out. So how did they, toddle their way to Australia? How did they get across the sea? Isn't that a good question?
Mm.
Yeah,
It's a
it's
good
a
one,
great
no?
question. I like it. I like it.
Yeah, yes, I've got an answer. 2 in the morning, Gideon will speak. That one I've got an answer. But that you can think about. That you can get that one. That's a good one. That's a good question. You can think about that one. If you're still bothered, I'll let you know next week. But
Yeah.
they're good questions because once you get into it, right? Once you get into it, like, oh, that's a good question. Right? That's a good question. It's funny. I actually bumped into the answer to that question in the biblical zoo in Jerusalem, believe it or not. Believe it or not.
That's got to be Hashgacha Pratis, right?
Yeah, that would be actually a practice. 100%. Although I have a friend who on tour got kicked out of the biblical zoo, who's now a rabbi, so I probably shouldn't really say his name. But he was kicked out for being too wild in the zoo. He was making animal noises at the animals and refusing to recoil. Either way.
Him in, not
Yeah,
chucked.
yeah. Pardon?
They should have kept him in, not thrown him out.
Kept him in one of the cages, to be honest. Okay, so right, anyway, that was that. So basically says Rav Dessler, we digress a little bit. He says, Rak b'mina Adam, so I can highlight this. Rak b'mina Adam, kol prat v'prat meyucha b'bchira, v'al ken shach hashgacha pratis kol echad ve'echad. Only when it comes to mankind, each and every individual is meyuchad b'bchira. In other words, mankind, I don't mean to say this in a cheesy way, but mankind, everyone matters, right? Because we're not subject to general purpose, we're subject to individualized purpose. That means that each one of us, firstly, has a goal. Secondly, that goal is different for, we've got slightly different goals due to our different talents and kind of who we are, right? But also each one of us has a part to play. So you can't talk about hashgacha klalis when it comes to people. You just can't, right? And therefore, he says it's just beautifully put in English, to be honest. He says, Hashgacha pratis is that we are driven towards a purpose. Truth is, that's actually what Rosh Hashanah is like, or it's supposed to be. I mean, Rosh Hashanah is a realignment of our recognition that we want to be driven towards a purpose. Yeah. The problem is that if we go backwards in that purpose, then we don't want to be driven backwards either. Right? So he says,
If everyone's got Hashgacha, this kind of came to light this week, really.
go on.
My son, who is not so good at getting up and out on time, I drive him to the Thameslink to make his journey slightly better.
Mhm.
And for like 2 or even 3 days this week, his lateness was rectified by the train being late, so he made it, and he says, "Hashem loves me. Hashem loves me," like which
Yeah,
is
yeah,
great.
yeah,
But I'm thinking, what does that mean for Hashem and all the other people on the train who are now late because he had to get his train? Like, how does that work? My Hashgacha Pratis, you're like, do you see what I mean? It's like,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
a really lovely message he's taken, but I'm kind of bothered about, well, what does that mean for all the others?
Yeah, only Hashem can calculate that. You can calculate that. You're right. You might have various overlapping hashgacha practices, right? I'm not allowed to reference it, but what they call sliding doors moments, meaning you might have various overlapping hashgacha pratis, where for me the hashgacha pratis is to miss the bus. For you, the hashgacha pratis is to get the bus. So only Hashem can deal with that. right? Because Hashem has many
Okay.
moments of interaction that
So,
he could.
so his message that Hashem loves him is a good message, and he should definitely box that
It's
up.
true, but you can tell him from me, Hashem loves everyone. It's true. But Hashem loves me isn't an excuse for laziness in the morning.
You can tell him that next time you see him.
Yeah, I have this sometimes, where people, I use this example, people say, Hashem absolutely loves me. I got up late, I rushed to the bus, I got there on time, sorry, I rushed the bus, and lo and behold, the bus was coming just there and then. Yeah. So Hashem did it all for me. Right. So what I'd normally say, and this happens with my kid as well, is I'd say, you're right. But why give Hashem the extra effort? You could have just got up 15 minutes earlier and Hashem could have had something else to focus on at that point.
Hashem can
Um,
multitask.
pardon?
Hashem can multitask
He
throughout the
can, he
world.
can. Yeah, he can. It's just a way of telling my kids to get up on time. It's not relying on miracles. Hashem can certainly multitask, and if he couldn't, we'd be in deep trouble. Um, Yeah, 100%, 100%. Okay. By the way, this is very Rosh Hashanah-esque. You should know, I'll do it now because I'm not having a massive chance to talk about Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah has these two themes. You've got the scary part, which is din, there's judgment. That's why we don't say Hallel. But it's also got the kind of simcha part, right? Namely, the fact that it's a Yom Tov. There's a Yom Tov meal. We're supposed to give money to tzedakah before Rosh Hashanah. Like there's a Yom Tov. There's a certain simcha of it. Yeah. How they go together is hotly debated, but one of the ideas is that the purpose of judgment is accountability, and accountability is predicated upon people having purpose, which, by the way, in turn is predicated upon free will, right? In other words, whilst we might see a test as negative, 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 right? But the test presupposes that you're supposed to succeed, right? Or otherwise, what's the test? It's just being stamped as failing. Like the test presupposes that you have a purpose, as that you're able to pass. Right. So the element, the Yom Tov, in other words, the place for there to be a simcha, joy within Rosh Hashanah, is not despite the din. Actually, it underpins a lot of the judgment. It doesn't mean the judgment is less severe, but it certainly underpins it. By the way, also Gideon, as you clearly remember, when we were dealing with I'll stop sharing the screen. When we're dealing with the issue of why do bad things happen to good people, right? Do you remember we asked an interesting question that actually my students asked today in school, which was, what happened to the Rosh Hashanah algorithm? Remember that one? In other words, if a good person on Rosh Hashanah presumably was written in the book of life, then how did they suffer in that year? I'm not asking philosophical, how is it fair and why did God do that? I'm asking a simple Rosh Hashanah question, right? To which we pointed out that according to some, Rosh Hashanah isn't about physical success in the year to come per se. But there are those who say that's how we feel it, to be honest. But some say Rosh Hashanah is about this Hashgacha. In other words, are you someone who is on Hashem's team or not? If you are, then Hashem will coach you in a certain way. That part of that might be challenges, because you can't be the best player, best team player without challenges. You can't be the best team player without willing to better yourself and willing to grow. Right? All of that is part of being a team player. Right? The flip side to that, or the other option, to be written in the book that we don't want to be written in, is that Hashem says, no, actually, you're not on my team. You've displayed that you're not interested in being my team, and therefore I'm not going to invest in you. Right? Just live life, and whatever happens, happens. Right? So it's less, maybe, I don't know if the word is binary, but it's less apparently binary than it feels. It's not about, am I going to get a lovely, comfortable life versus am I going to get a suffering life? It's about, is Hashem going to direct your life towards entry to the world to come? And are you going to be realigned to what the purpose of life is? And that's where Rosh Hashanah is. Okay. I'm talking about directing towards reaching a purpose. We've successfully not started the topic that I wanted to do. Right. So what I'm going to do, I see about a minute and a half left. Let me ask some questions. So at least I feel like we've started, and therefore we're responsible to start next week. Yeah, is that all right? So it's like this. We're going to start the topic of the Jewish people next week. I've just got two starter questions to add to the various blood questions we had. And the starter questions are like this. Number one, is the concept of the Jewish people something that was always in the pipeline or no? Another way to answer this chronologically is like, who was the first Jew and why? Was Abraham Jewish? Was Adam Jewish? Was Moshe? So who were like the first Jews and why did that come about? Or was there ever a plan that humanity on the whole would serve God? And yeah, it doesn't need to be centralized. You know what I mean? Issue number one. Issue number two is if you do need a people, then what about everyone else? Or the flip side of asking that is, isn't it a bit like racist to say, well, there's the Jewish people and we're the chosen ones, and you know what I mean? Like, how does that work exactly? Yeah. So those are the two questions, please God. We're going to deal with the next few weeks. Like I said, we're going to have share, please God, next week. Then we're going to take a break until after the various Chagim. As crazy as that sounds, then we'll be back, I guess, in mid-October. The life of a Jew.
Wow.
There we are. All right. Good to see
Excellent.
everyone.
So